our mind's consciousness, or would this be in a different space?
Okay, let's look at that. So the answer to the question is, how much of your waking day do you put your attention on matter, on the material world, and how much of your waking day are you aware of energy and frequency? For most people, they're unaware of the quantum field, and if you're unaware of it, it doesn't exist for you. Right. Just like you have a nose, but if you're unaware of it, it doesn't exist for you. The moment you become aware of it, it exists. Well, the quantum field, you can study all kinds of science, and they'll tell you there is this invisible field of frequency and energy that exists beyond the senses that tend to connect everything physical and material. In fact, everything physical and material is connected to this field. Okay, so how do you get there? Right? How do you get there?
How do you get there?
How do you get there? So we discovered that when you take all of your attention off your body and you are not paying attention to your emotions, your drives, your habits, if you could take all of your attention off of every element in your environment, your cell phone, your tablet, your computer, your car, your whatever it is, your bed, take your attention away from everything, every place that you live, where you sleep, where you work, and you're not thinking about time. You're not thinking about your schedule, where you need to be, or what happened yesterday. You can relax into the present moment. There tends to be a dramatic change in the way the brain functions when people do this properly. We call it getting beyond yourself, but in a sense, you're dissociating from your three-dimensional reality. Why? Because if you're thinking about anything in your three-dimensional reality, that's where your attention is and that's where your energy is, okay? So we kind of figured out this formula when people really become nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, and no time. We're pretty much all of a sudden outside the constraints of the Newtonian world of got to do something to get an outcome. And if you can teach people how to linger there without a name, without a face, without a profession, without a family, without a culture, without a past, without a disease, you teach them how to be in this place we call the unknown, right? And you teach them that from that place, that invisible field, is where everything material comes from. And if they could create coherence in their brain, you need a strong signal in the brain. The more coherent the brain, the more stronger the signal.
What do you mean a strong signal?
Okay, let's see how I could say this. When most people, when we look at brains in real time, and we're looking at people's how their mind is working. When you're under stress, okay, stress is created by not being able to predict something that's going to happen in your life, the perception that something's going to get worse or you can't control something, right? So when that occurs, we switch on that primitive nervous system called the fight or flight nervous system, and the brain goes into this very alarmed state called high beta. That means pay attention to the outer world. There's danger out there. But if it's not a predator and it's traffic or your coworker or your ex,
right,
this is where it gets to be a problem because it becomes very maladaptive, right? So when we're in that state and the brain is in that aroused state, we try to control and predict everything. So every person, every object, everything, every place, even your body has a neurological network in your brain, right? So as the arousal happens, we start shifting our attention to all these elements, and like a lightning storm in the clouds, the brain starts firing very, very incoherently. And when the brain's incoherent, we're incoherent.
That's not a strong signal.
It's a static on the wire. That's disconnection. There is no signal.
Right.
So when we're in that state, we're always really looking for the worst case scenario of what's going to happen, because if you prepare for the worst, anything less happens, a better chance of survival, right? So in this kind of aroused state, as we shift our attention to each one of these elements that are known in our environment, the brain starts compartmentalizing and firing out of order. And that is what creates what's called autonomic dysregulation. That causes the brain and body to get really out of balance, right? So in that state, we're over-focused. You know, when you're stressed, you're over-focused on something. You can't stop thinking about it. Our research shows that when you do that, you actually make your brain worse because you're analyzing your problems within some disturbing emotion, and that emotion is driving you further out of balance. You're actually knocking your brain and body out of balance by thought alone, and you're driving it into these more aroused states, right?
For someone that's been living like that for decades, that's their base state. How do they even realize how to get out of that.
They don't. Usually it takes crisis, right? It takes trauma.
Extreme breakdown.
Yeah, breakdown. It
A
does.
loss, a death,
all of
a
that.
breakup, a divorce, a near
bankruptcy, whatever it is, a disease, a diagnosis, whatever, something where you just can't go on business as usual. Like, now it's time to really start looking, right?
They have to wake up then.
Yeah. So let's get back to the concept of abundance here, because
you need a strong signal in this field.
Right. So then if you can teach people to do the exact opposite, go from putting all of their attention on everything physical and material in the world of separation, and instead of narrowing their focus on something material, ask them to broaden their focus and put it on nothing. Now, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but when you put your attention on space and you divert your attention, the act of sensing without thinking actually starts to slow the brainwaves down. Not only slow it down, but all of a sudden cause the brain to start reintegrating, starts to synchronize, right? And so you see different compartments of the brain that were firing out of order start to resonate. They start to communicate. They're all of a sudden synchronizing, and what syncs in the brain kind of links in the brain. So when a person has their whole entire brain firing in rhythm, that's a very strong signal that you can send out into the field.
So when that signal is strong in that position, what can you create from that space?
Okay, but that's only one element.
Okay.
So then the clear intention tends to be a very important element that we have to get down. And the more coherent the brain, the more clear the signal for that intention. So with intention and attention, we could actually make thought more real than anything else. Now, what is that? You're saying, what would it be like to be wealthy? What would it be like to be abundant? What would it be like to have all my needs met? What would it be like to have more than I need? What would I do if I had everything I ever wanted? The answer always is the same. You start giving stuff away. Because if an abundant person is truly abundant, why would they hold on? They would say, I'm not in lack. There's more for everybody, okay? Turns out, though, that the signal sent out isn't enough. You have to draw the experience back to you. And so
send the signal out to,
it's coherent brain,
financial freedom,
whatever
abundance, all these different things.
Right. Whatever that is for you. Whatever that is for you.
Putting that out there with your signal, with the intention and the attention.
Right.
And then how do you draw it to you? So in the physical world,
in the physical world, you got to go get it. You got to do something. This is the plane of demonstration. You got to go get it. And when you're in lack until it occurs, right?
But I'm hearing you say there's a way to not chase but attract.
All right. So if you're creating from the field instead of from matter, right? There's a very strong possibility that you'll shorten the distance between the thought of what you want and the experience of having it. And when there's a vibrational match between your energy and that future that you want to experience, now if you're creating from the field, you actually don't go anywhere to get it. You actually draw it to you. So here comes the synchronicities, the serendipities, the coincidences, the opportunities, and they come out of nowhere. And you say, I don't understand. I didn't do anything. Well, you changed your energy. And so then the other element is a coherent heart, right? And the heart has a magnetic signature. And the magnetic signature is what draws reality to us, right? So you combine that clear intention with a coherent brain. Now here's the key. This takes practice.
Yes.
Because the person who's living in lack is usually unworthy, is usually insecure, is usually in their past, they're usually frustrated, they're usually impatient, they're usually resentful because nothing's changing out there because it's taking too long. Well, everything takes a lot of time when you do matter to matter, right? So then if you teach them, okay, we know all about that. We know the story behind that. We know what your parents told you about money, all that other, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But now let's do something that would be really cool. Let's write down the feelings of how you would feel if that future happened, and you're going to have to feel that feeling before it occurs. So now, okay, what does an abundant person feel? Pretty much free, a lot of freedom.
Peace, excited, joyful.
In love with life, grateful to be alive, abundant. Okay, now let's practice feeling those. Turns out when you're feeling those other emotions like resentment and impatience and frustration, you're stepping on the gas pedal, you're just turning on the sympathetic nervous system, and you're stepping on the brake.
At the same time.
At the same time, which is you're angry, you're frustrated, but the fight or flight nervous system says run, fight, or hide, and you're sitting in a Zoom meeting and your neck is pulsating is because the heart is beating against the closed system, right? You're not using it in an adaptive way. So the heart starts firing out of order. It starts firing incoherently, and incoherent waves cancel each other out. It's called destructive interference, and then we stop trusting our future. Energy leaves the heart. Energy leaves the brain, energy leaves the heart, and you can't get in touch with the feeling of your future because in survival, which those are hormones of stress, all those emotions, in survival, it's not a time to create, right? It's time to run, fight, and hide. Okay, so we gotta lay down the very thing we used our whole life to get what we want. The habit of doing it that way for something greater to occur.
I think you hit on a really important nerve there, this idea that we're living in a constant state of stress. And when I think about our community who are thinking about dating, and I think about friends in my life that are trying to find romantic love, especially in their life, and their feeling around dating, mentally, physically, emotionally, is stressful. The idea of dating is stressful. The idea of being on a date is stressful. The idea of talking to someone is stressful. And it's so interesting, you're so right, that how are you going to create when all of your emotions around this is stress? You've got the stress of a timeline. Gosh, I'm in my mid-30s. I should have found someone by now, is things I hear. Oh, I'm in the stress of, I've been out on 7 dates in the last couple of months and none of them were good enough. And so I'm in the stress of scarcity. And so you're so right. That's what we're feeling. How do we get out of that system and that cycle? Because a lot of the time we've developed that feeling towards finding romantic love for like weeks, months, years.
Yeah.
How do you break that cycle?
There's nothing wrong with doing any of those things. But when we're stressed, we're altered. That stress is when we're out of balance. We're not ourselves, right? We can't relax and be authentic. And so typically, it usually takes a crisis or a disease or a diagnosis or a trauma or a loss or a betrayal for a person to really decide, is this really who I want to continue to be? So my message is, why wait for that, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying, I want to be in a relationship. I want the following things in a relationship from this person, or what might be my ideal relationship.
How detailed should you get on something like that? Like, should you be talking about physical things, or is it mainly emotional and connectedness? Like,
I think people have an image in their mind of what they like or what their type is or whatever. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think what people are really looking for is connection and joy. Like, people should be in a relationship. The reason they should be in a relationship is to be overjoyed to be with the person that you're with, right? You want joy in your life. For me, it would make sense then if the person got very clear on what they wanted, then they should start on the journey to become that very person. They should really work on being that very person that they want. So there would have to be some change that they would have to make in order to be worthy enough to create a person that they would attract in their life. And we cannot attract anything in our life that we feel separate from. Trusting in a future that you can't see or experience, you have to lay down the very thing you use your whole life to get what you want, to trust that something greater could happen. And that's not something that's very easy. So I like the idea that it wouldn't happen on a date that was from an app. It could happen in a bank. It could happen at a seminar. It could happen in the grocery store, all in a way that you least expect, right? And I think that when we get to a point where we're so happy with ourselves, we're no longer looking, because we feel like we already have it. I think that's the state where people attract an equal.
Mm. Getting to that place feels like a challenge for people because it feels like I'm doing this so that I can get someone. Yeah. Right? It's always like connected that way as a...
Well, we're conditioned that way. We're conditioned in a way to like, okay, I need something out there. I need the experience, the proof. I need the event to occur. And the end product of that event or experience is called an emotion. The emotion takes away the lack or separation from not having it. So we're waiting for the event to occur to take away the feeling of separation or lack. And actually, that's not the healthiest way to create. And actually, we should feel the emotion of the experience before it happens, so that if you're feeling the emotion of that future before it happens, truly feeling it, you wouldn't be looking for it. You would only be looking for it when you felt separate from it, right? So can you maintain that state? Because the only way you're going to believe in that future is you have to feel the emotion associated with it.
So good.
The moment you feel the lack and the separation, you're going to believe in the past. And there's a story that goes along with the past that has everything to do with it. Dating is hard, or finding a person, or whatever that is. The story that we tell ourselves that we actually accept, believe, and surrender to as if it's the truth, right? So that's exactly what programs the subconscious mind into a belief, right? So the default is so seamless to lose that vision or that belief in the future the moment we start feeling the emotions of lack or survival in the past, right? That's the moment we can't see that future any longer, because we would be looking at that future through the lens of the past, and we would doubt that future could actually exist. So it's really an interesting thing that I learned just in the last few years, because I interview hundreds of people backstage that have had a dramatic change in their health. I'm talking about significant chronic diseases where they have no blood values that are abnormal, have no scans that show any signs of the disease any longer. And I asked them, like, how did you do that? Like, what did you do? And some of them say, like, I was doing my meditation sometimes 3 times a day because the drugs weren't working, the chemo wasn't working, the drug trials weren't working, the surgeries weren't working, the radiation wasn't working, the diet wasn't working, nothing was working, right? And so the only thing that they were left with was the belief in themselves. And when you believe in yourself, you got to believe in possibility. And when you believe in possibility, you have to believe in yourself. So they were doing their meditations 3 times a day because they lost their belief that they could heal. They lost their belief. And so they were doing their meditation again to change their emotional state so that they could believe in that future again instead of believe in their past. If you keep doing that, it's that thought and that feeling, it's that image, that's emotion, that stimulus and response that's conditioning the body emotionally into the future. And that's really how you change the belief. So the people were doing the work to change their belief because they defaulted back to the self-doubt, and that of course is disbelief, and that's chronic, right? So then how many times do we have to do that until we stop doing that and start doing something else? I think that's when our reality begins to change. We have a lot of beliefs about things that we're not even conscious of.
And they're not been tested. We don't know if they're true.
We don't know if they're true. We've actually, in fact, made them up.
What happens when someone's been catfished? When they've been heartbroken? When they've been cheated on?
The stronger the emotion you feel from some event in your life, the more altered you are inside of you, the more you remember the event. You're holding yourself hostage to the past.
What's the challenge when someone's lost their belief because they've had a heartbreak? Let's say, what happens when someone's been catfished, when they've been betrayed, when they've been heartbroken, when they've been cheated on, when they've been lied to, manipulated, gaslit? Like, they've had a moment that has made them lose belief because they've been hurt and broken so many times in love.
Yeah.
And now you're right, on a belief level, they don't believe they're lovable. They don't believe love exists for them. They don't believe good people exist, right? These are all beliefs. And so what do you do when you've actually gone through quite you could call it a traumatic, a toxic event or experience that someone's been through?
Yeah, I think everybody's had those. I think, once again, the stronger the emotion you feel from some event in your life, the more altered you are inside of you, the more you remember the event. The brain actually freezes that frame, right? So the person thinks neurologically within the circuitry of that experience. and they feel chemically within the boundaries of that emotion. And how we think and how we feel becomes our state of being. So every time they remember the event, they're producing that same chemistry, as I said, over and over again. And you're conditioning the body into a belief, right? And the moment we draw a conclusion about that experience, that's the belief, right? That becomes the belief that we accept to, believe, and surrender to. So then beliefs are subconscious states of being, right? So, and it tends to be 95% of who we are by the time we get to the middle of our life. So it's those subconscious beliefs that really run our life and run our reality. So it would make sense then to the person, unless I can heal from the experience and overcome the emotion, because the memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom, and you never have to do it again because you know now that you know. If that's the truth, then okay, I'll do this for a period of time, but this state is not loving to me. Living in this state is not loving to me. What's loving to me is that I actually overcome the emotion of the past. And when I overcome the emotion of the past, now the body's no longer believing in that any longer, right? So that theoretically is easier said than done. So the survival emotions tend to become very addictive. So the rush of just remembering the event is an arousal for the body, and people become very addicted to their beliefs, right? And so, but if you tell a person like, okay, your subconscious mind is going to keep replaying the same experience in your life unless you heal, okay, that could make sense to certain people. If you can't overcome that emotion, then you'll never be able to open your heart. So do you want love in your life or not? Okay, forgiveness then, and we've discovered this. Forgiveness is when you overcome the emotion of your past and you no longer have your attention on that person or that experience any longer, right? And so you feel so good that you no longer want to feel bad, right? And so you free yourself from that belief, and you free that person as well, or the experience. And literally that's energy that's liberated as information that the body can actually use to create with, right? So I think there's information and knowledge that just has to be given to people for them to understand, okay, justified or not, valid or not. The only person that this really is affecting is me. They went on with their life.
Yeah.
They started a new career. They're living in a new place. They're writing a book. They're on their way, and you're holding yourself hostage to the past, right? So then you got to trust that love is available, or love is real. In order for you to create someone in your life that is loving, you would have to be worthy of love, and that means you would have to feel love too. So I think people make their way out of this all the time, and we deal with severe PTSD, with veterans, and there's some pretty brutal memories there, and there's a lot of trauma that's stored in the body as well, and they deal with a lot of difficulties. And when you tell them it's the heart that resets the baseline for the trauma in the brain, all you have to do is have the courage to open that thing again. And they may come up against themselves for a few days, but once it happens, and they understand the process, their past is wisdom. They don't have to ever go back there again, right? They understand it all, but there's no charge associated with it any longer. And that's when we belong to the future, right? That's when the synchronicities and the coincidences and the miracles and the opportunities begin to show up in our life that prove to us that we are the creators of our life.
So is the issue that people, when they want change, they don't change deeply enough? They're just looking at, well, if I do this particular new physical habit, that will be able to change things, but the underlying currents that are driving that behavior are always going to come in and then take over, despite the fact that you don't want to eat sugar anymore, or you want to be more polite with your partner, or you want to be more... It's too surface level with a lot of the change that tries to be attempted.
Yeah, I think that people, unfortunately, they have to get knocked to our lowest level sometimes,
where you're no longer inside the jar. When you're inside the jar, you can't read the label. You got to get so uncomfortable that you could actually see yourself, right? And so that tragedy, that crisis, that disease, the diagnosis, the loss, it's got to be so severe that you finally look at yourself and say, maybe it's me. Oh my God, could it possibly be me? But you're looking at yourself kind of through the eyes of someone else because you don't feel like you in that moment. You're so uncomfortable that you can see yourself. That concept is called metacognition, right? So a lot of times people wait for that crisis or the diagnosis or the betrayal to go, oh my God, I got to really change because I'm really unhappy, or I can't blame that person or my past or my circumstance because and nothing's working here. I got to really start making those changes. So when they see themselves separate from their program, they're becoming conscious of their unconscious self. That is the first step to change. Now, I say you can learn and change in a state of pain and suffering, which most people like to do, or you can learn and change in a state of joy and inspiration, right? So could you be defined by a vision of the future? And could you get up from your morning practice actually believing in your future more than you're believing in your past? So from that elevated state where you combine a clear intention with an elevated emotion, from an elevated state, instead of a self-limiting state, you can be conscious of that old self as well. And so I think, God, what a great time in history to be alive, because this is a time in history where it's not enough to know. This is really a time in history to know how. And I've been at this long enough, Chris, to know that 20 years ago, people didn't hear it like they hear it now. The information is readily available, and people are realizing, kind of, if I have this dream, if I have this goal, how bad do I want it? And if they really want it, and we've all done this, you sit down and you say, what would it be like to be super healthy, super wealthy, super in love, super mystical, transcendental, whatever it is? Like, you ask that question and your brain gets really creative. It starts combining circuits in new ways, and you start getting this vision of the future, this possibility that you actually put yourself in this future reality. It becomes so real that you start to feel the emotion as if you were actually there. And so that moment when you come out of your resting state, the stronger the emotion you feel when you hold that vision, the more you'll remember that vision. That's creating a memory. So the person comes out of their resting state and they make a decision with such firm intention that the amplitude of that decision carries a level of energy that causes their body to respond to their mind. That their choice that they're making in that moment becomes a moment in time that they would never forget. They'll say to you, I remember the moment I made up my mind to change. I was in this place. I was with these people. I was this particular time. That the event is a long-term memory. And they've come out of the resting state. And we could say then they're giving their body a taste of the future emotionally, and somehow they begin to embody whatever that future is, and now they begin to move in a different direction. And so they start trusting in their future more because they feel like they're connected to it. So then the person who's really interested in making a change would have to come to that same state again in order to produce the same effect. If they say, I don't feel like it, or I want to be nicer, or whatever, and there's nothing really at stake. Intention is really meaning. You gotta have a meaning behind what you're doing. So people who now say, I want a better life, I can't have a better life unless I change. And when I change, my life will change. Now you're not so interested in what's happening out there. You're more interested in what's going on inside of you.
To go from any state that we're in now to a new state, that transformation process requires stepping from known to unknown.
Yeah.
How can people get more comfortable with stepping into the unknown, and why is it such a scary place?
Let's see if I can explain this on two levels. The brain is a record of the past. The brain is a reflection of everything in your environment that's known to you. It's an artifact. It's a repository of everything you've learned and experienced in your life. It's a memory bank. And so people wake up in the morning, and every person, every object, everything, every place, every experience that they've had in their life is mapped neurologically in their brain. So they wake up in the morning, and the first thing they do is they think about those problems. And those problems are memories that are really tattooed in the recesses of their gray matter. And the moment they start remembering the problem, they start remembering the past, they're thinking in the past. Every one of those experiences or problems has an emotion associated to them. So the moment they think of the past and they start feeling unhappy or anxious, now their body's in the past. Thoughts are the language of the brain, feelings are the language of the body. Thought and feeling, an image and an emotion, a stimulus and response, and you're conditioning the body emotionally into the familiar past. And the body's so objective, as I said, doesn't know the difference between the real life experience and the one that you're imagining. The body's actually believing it's living in the environment where that problem is actually existing in the present moment. So that becomes the familiar past, and we call that the known. Then people get up and then they rush through a series of automatic routine behaviors. They're on automatic pilot because they do the same thing today as they did yesterday. And a habit is a redundant set of automatic, unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through repetition. So now the person is in habituation, a program, and their body's dragging them into the same predictable future based on what they did in their past. In other words, we could take their yesterday and set it on their tomorrow, and there's going to be a lot of predictability. So if you can predict something, then that's the known too. So the familiar past is the known, the predictable future is the known. There's only one place left where the unknown exists, and that's the sweet spot of the generous present moment. And so we teach people how to master the moment, how to master their attention. And where you place your attention is where you place your energy. And paying attention is being present. And you know when someone's paying attention to you because they're present with you. And you know when they're present with you because they're paying attention to you. Well, it's the exact same thing. So you're sitting with your eyes closed and you start thinking, how long is this going to go? I got a lot of things to do. Oh, God, I got to think about that place I got to go to and meet that person. I got another meeting over there. And now your brain is actually defaulting and going to that predictable future. We discovered that you're not a bad meditator actually at all. This is actually how you do meditate. You become conscious that you've gone unconscious in your predictable future and you return your attention back to the present moment. That's a victory. Okay, so then your body says, hey, it's been about an hour. You usually get pretty judgmental around this time. You get in traffic, you get really angry, and you're sitting in a meditation, and all of a sudden you start feeling aroused and impatient and frustrated. And most people think, oh, well, that means I can't meditate. Well, actually, your body's used to being stimulated from something outside of itself. You settle the body back down into the present moment, and you tell it it's no longer the mind, you're the mind. Do this enough times and train the body to be in the present moment, to be in the unknown. There'll come a moment where the body is no longer the mind. The servant's no longer the master, you're the mind. And when that occurs, there's this tremendous liberation of energy that takes place in the body. The body's going from particle to wave. It's going from matter to energy. The body's being freed from the chains of the past or the predictable future. And we discover energy actually kind of moves right into a person's heart. And they start feeling really grateful to be in the present moment instead of being in the unknown and trying to predict the next moment. So it's a practice. And if you practice it on a regular basis, we discovered you can get really good at being in the unknown and going against thousands of years of programming that says the unknown is a dangerous and a scary place. There's better chances of survival if you run from the unknown than you embrace it. So you put the person they keep relaxing into the unknown, and sooner or later they realize nothing bad is happening in the unknown, and they just start relaxing and expanding. And there's just a host of biological changes that begin to take place. So I think you can make that a skill or a habit.